All right, welcome everybody. Can you join me in thanking our band tonight? My goodness, what an incredible way to get started. I'm listening to them, I'm singing, I'm listening to all of you sing, and I'm thinking, I honestly am not sure what I have to contribute to this. Half from there, that was really wonderful. Welcome everyone, my name is Amanda Neppl, and I am one of the pastors here, and even though I'm not sure what I'm going to contribute, don't worry, I'm going to try. We're going to stick around here for a little bit and see what God has for us tonight. I don't know if you are aware of this, but this Sunday is All Saints Sunday, and I don't know if you're aware of what that means, but what All Saints Weekend is, and in our case, on All Saints Sunday, is that we remember those who have gone home to be with the Lord. And you're going to see later during communion, you're going to see names scroll across the screen of people of part of our Hope community that have gone home to be with Jesus during the last year. But what we emphasize during All Saints Sunday truly is the incredible grace and mercy and the saving work of Jesus Christ. And All Saints Sunday, we remember that we grieve as people of hope. We grieve as people who remember that our God is so great, that the love that he has for us is so deep, as you heard in the Bible reading that Melissa did for us tonight, that we can search for the ends of it, we can search to the top, we can search for the bottom, and we'll never be able to find the borders and the limits of God's love for us. And that love that he has for us is revealed in Jesus Christ. And so as we gather here together tonight, just to kind of get our hearts set as we continue, like what we come together tonight to celebrate is that we are so deeply loved. And if you don't hear anything else that gets said tonight about the American church and of the things that we're going to talk about, what I want you to walk out of here tonight with, if it's nothing else, you are loved greatly and deeply in a way that you cannot ever possibly understand. That is true for you. That is also true for every single person that you encounter in your day-to-day life, that they are deeply and truly loved by God as well, whether they know it or not. And as we talk then about what it means to be a part of the North American church, and as we answer the question tonight, is there hope for the North American church? Like, we're going to get to that, but remembering that we are the church, that we carry that with us wherever we go, and so we have an opportunity to make sure that other people know that there is hope for them because there is hope in the church. So as we dig into that tonight, I'm going to kind of just put all my cards on the table. The question that we are answering this evening is there hope for the North American church? And as I said, I'm not going to hold back. The answer is yes. Unequivocally, there is hope for the American church. I'm so glad that you asked. Now, we will spend some time talking about that a little bit. I tend to be a person who generally is optimistic. I tend to be a glass half full kind of a person most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time, that's the way that I tend to go through life. And so it's naturally in my disposition to believe that there is always hope. And so there is indeed hope for the North American church. However, I do happen to have some statistics to kind of back that up in addition to just like my general sunny disposition, okay? So we can kind of take a look at what's been going on in the world. And on this graph here, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but all the way over here on your left, that's the year 2007. And so the Christian share of the United States population, kind of from 2007, kind of continues to go down a little bit and kind of hits its low point in 2022. But you can see that after that, not as it just leveled off, but it's actually starting to pick up a little bit. And so there is more people who are reporting that they identify as Christian, that is an important part of their life. Now, if you dig into this a little bit more, what you really find is some things that are really interesting, some things that maybe you wouldn't expect, because the growth that is happening is primarily being driven by younger people. It's primarily being driven by millennials who, by the way, if you're a millennial, you're not that young anymore. I hate to tell you, okay? You're inching up there. But it's primarily being driven by millennials and Gen Z. And that's really fascinating and really interesting and really incredible to realize that it is younger people who are driving the growth in the church. And if you dig into that even a little bit more than that, what you find out is that it actually is younger men in the Gen Z cohort who are actually driving that growth. In fact, they were asked, do you consider following Jesus, to be an important part of your life? That was the question that was asked. And from 2019 to 2025, that number went up by almost 20%. Almost 20% more young men in the Generation Z age group said that they consider Jesus to be an important part of their life. That number grows for young women in the Gen Z and millennial group as well, just not quite as steeply as it does for young men. To be fair, the young men started out at a lower position than the women did, so they had a little bit further to go. They had a little bit more opportunity for that, but the growth is there and the growth is happening. This is a really incredibly hopeful time then to realize that younger people are catching on. Younger people are recognizing that the things that the world has to offer maybe aren't all they cracked up to be, and they're figuring it out before they set their lives up and build their house on the sand, so to speak, right? It's a really incredible thing. The deal with the North American church, though, I will just say this. There are pockets of revival happening all over the place, and you can see that. We had a Holy Spirit retreat yesterday for Alpha that it was so incredible. Just the presence of the Holy Spirit here in this room, here in the bridge, here in the breakout rooms, it was phenomenal. There are pockets of revival that are happening all over the place, and you can find them pretty easily. If you're the type of person who tends to be a little bit more of a glass half empty type of a person, you can find that as well, if that's what you're looking for. But even at the end of the day, there's the statistics to kind of back up that there are some really cool things happening in the church, but our hope for the North American church doesn't come from those numbers. It doesn't come from statistics. It doesn't come from trends. The truth of the matter is the hope for the church has been and is and will continue to be in Jesus. When Jesus was talking to Simon, and he told him that from now on he was going to be known as Peter. And he said, from now on, I'm going to call you Peter, and Peter means rock. And Jesus said, on this rock, I will build my church. Jesus has said from the very beginning that he is taking responsibility for this. From the very beginning, this has been Jesus' number one project after going to the cross and dying for our sins and solving sin and death for us. After that, Jesus' project is establishing his church. Because the church is still God's plan A for people to hear about who Jesus is and for people to hear about how much Jesus loves them. The church has always been the plan A that God was going to do that. And so we are invited into that space. Jesus doesn't need us. Jesus invites us. He invites us to bring our gifts and our times and our talents and our treasures and all of those things. He invites us to be a part of what he is doing in the world to bring hope and healing to people who are desperate for it. So ultimately, the reason that we have hope, even if that graph as it headed down, even if it started in 2025 to dive and just take a total nosedive and end up at zero, there would still be hope for the North American church because it belongs to Jesus. And he is going to build it. He is going to do the work. That's what we put our hope in every single day. And it's a good hope. It's a hope that's not based on a wish upon a star. It's a hope that's based on the promises of God who always keeps his promises. Some of you know that in my life, I have made some questionable life choices in the last year and a half, and so I am working on my doctorate. And that has proved to be something that's a little bit kind of a lot. And I am almost at the point where I will not have structured classes with deadlines and things. Like right now I'm still in a class where there's an assignment and it's usually read 1,000 pages and then write 1,001 pages on what you read, and then there's strict deadlines on that. I'm almost at the point where there are no more deadlines and I'll get to really be digging more into my thesis beginning in January, and I am really looking forward to that because frankly, the deadlines are ruining my life, to be honest, okay? But here's kind of the good news and the way that the Lord is working things together for good in my life, which I am so thankful for. I have been in a class on the book of Ezra. And here's the thing with the book of Ezra. We don't usually spend a lot of time in the book of Ezra. We don't usually do a lot of Bible readings for our weekend messages based on the book of Ezra. However, as we look at kind of what's going on in the church and where our hope is and what are some of the pitfalls that we might want to look out for, this deep dive into the book of Ezra has actually proved to be quite helpful. And so I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in Ezra, and I'm going to kind of bring this all together, I promise, here in just a few minutes. But what's going on in the book of Ezra is this. After centuries of God's people being told that if they did not quit worshiping false idols, if they did not start caring for the poor and the widows and the orphans and the foreigners and the marginalized among them, if they did not start looking to God and trusting God and actually following God and remembering who they are before God, that they were called to be God's holy people, they were blessed so that they could be a blessing to the people around them. God told them for centuries through the prophets, if you don't start to figure this out, then what's going to happen is I'm going to allow you to experience the consequences of your actions, which you continue to chase after over and over and over by not doing the things that God had called them to do. And so after centuries, literal centuries of being warned and having so many opportunities again and again and again, God allowed his people to be defeated by the Babylonians. And so the Babylonian Empire came in and eventually destroyed the city of Jerusalem, eventually more or less annihilated the entire country of Judah, and took several of the people out of Jerusalem, out of the country of Judah, took many of them back with them to Babylon. And that was what we know in the Old Testament as the Babylonian exile. This is a really big event for God's people because they had been promised that if they didn't straighten out, things were going to happen. But they had been promised that they would be a nation. God had promised Abraham that they would be a great nation, that they would have a land and a territory. And so even though they had squandered it, even though they didn't listen, even though they refused to repent and do what they were asked to do, they still then somehow completely lost their identity then in having to go into the exile in Babylon. And they had to stay away from Jerusalem and the country of Judah for about 6-ish decades. And then what happens is world events happen and things transpire. The Babylonians who had carted them off were defeated by an up-and-coming world superpower, the Persians. And the Persians governed a little bit differently than the Babylonians did. The Persians said, hey, here's the deal. As long as you pay your taxes and as long as you don't cause a whole bunch of trouble, we're going to let you go back to where you're from, and we're going to let you worship your God in the way that you want to worship your God. And again, just pay your taxes, don't cause trouble, and we'll kind of let you do what you want. And so at this 6-ish decades or so, the people begin to go back to the city of Jerusalem. They begin to go back to the country of Judah, to where their families had lived before. But here's the thing. There were a number of people who lived in Jerusalem, who lived in Judah, who had not been taken to Babylon. They were descendants of Abraham. They were Israelites. But they had been left behind, probably because they weren't essentially a threat. They were poor. They were subsistence farmers. They got by just on what they could raise and do that kind of thing. And so they didn't have a lot of opportunity to get organized, to cause trouble. And so they were left behind. So the book of Ezra then is about the exiles who return and them trying to figure out who they are. And so these verses here kind of tell us a little bit about that. And if you're paying attention to the fact that there were people who were Israelites who stayed behind, you can start to get a glimpse of potentially what was going wrong. Because the people who came home, they rebuilt the temple. The people who had stayed behind were just trying to eke out a living. They had not had the opportunity to do that. So the people came home, they dedicated the temple, and there was great joy. Everybody was having a great time. And they celebrated with the rest of the people who had returned from the exile. The next verse says, on April 2nd, the returned exiles celebrated the Passover. Maybe you can begin to see a little bit of what's going on, because what the returned exiles were doing is they formed a very close-knit, tight, and community, which they continued to make smaller and smaller and more inclusive. And they would not let the Israelites who had stayed behind, be a part of what they were doing. To the point that when they rebuilt the temple, they wouldn't allow those Israelites to have any part of it. And the hurt feelings festered and grew and got worse and worse and worse over the next period of time that they were, while the book of Ezra is being written. The returned exiles became so exclusive and so closed in on themselves that they became completely distrusting of anyone who had not come back from the exile. They would not let anyone else, even their fellow Israelites, be a part of their community. They were afraid. They were trying to keep any threats to their community out and far away from them because they wanted to make sure that their worship was done exactly the way it was supposed to be done, that things didn't get messy at all because they were worried about potentially being punished again. Hopefully, maybe you're beginning to see some ways that this kind of correlates with some of the things that go on in the church today. I am not saying by any stretch of the imagination that the church in the United States has faced anything even remotely similar to the exile. And in fact, I'll hear people talk sometimes about persecution in the American church, and that always just makes me a little bit nervous because I think our brothers and sisters in places like China and India would like to have a word about those types of things. Jesus said we were going to be misunderstood, so we can expect that. To be misunderstood is very different than being persecuted, so I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that these two situations are the same. But when we look at how the returned exiles set themselves up and how they closed themselves off and how they excluded people who were not exactly the way they wanted them to be, we can kind of begin to see a little bit of a cautionary tale in what happened with God's people after they returned from the exile. So we're going to look at a few of these things as we kind of talk about the North American church then. So one of the things that this returning group of exiles did that we can find ourselves in a very similar situation is they allowed what they were against to become more important than what they are for. And what they were against was anyone who wasn't exactly like them. Anyone who didn't have the exact same experiences that they'd had. Anyone who didn't see things exactly the same way that they saw them. Anyone who didn't worship exactly the same way that they worshiped. And they were united in what they were against. They were united in their enemy, which was anyone who was an outsider. And I think that this is so easy for us to do. It creates a sense of safety for us when we find a group of people that we can be united, a group of people or a population or a situation that we can be united in that we are against that thing. And it's okay to be united in being against poverty. It's okay to be united in the things that are not of God. It's good to be united against those types of things. It's good to be united against hunger, all that kind of thing. Absolutely, 100%. But what they were against and what we can find ourselves being against if we're not careful is particular people. And making people the problem instead of the problem being the problem. And anytime we make people the problem, then what we're doing is really it's just a false sense of unity. Because if our unity requires an enemy, that's not unity at all by its very definition. And it's so easy for us to fall into that if we're not careful, if we don't remember first and foremost what we are for. And what I know hope is for, and what I know there are definitely really important parts of a church that are for, and we need to continue to remember to be for this, is that we are for people experiencing Jesus' love. We are for people believing in Jesus and not perishing, but having everlasting life. We are for people finding rich and satisfying life in Jesus Christ. We are for them moving away from the things that are stealing life from them and moving toward the things that give life, the things that Jesus gives us. Jesus cast a very wide net in this case about being for people. There's a time in the Gospel of Mark where the disciples come to Jesus, led by John, and they come to Jesus and they say, "Teacher, we found people, we saw somebody who was using your name to cast out demons, if you can believe it. How dare they use your name to do something like that?" So we went ahead and told them to stop. And what John is essentially saying in that space is, we want to be the insiders. We want to be the cool kids. We want to be the ones with the secret Jesus sauce, right? We want to be the one to do the things. We don't want those people to do it because they probably do it a little bit differently than we would like them to. They probably say the words a little bit differently. They maybe have some other things that they do a little bit differently. We don't want this for them, Jesus. We need to keep this just within our group, just within the way that we do it. We don't want this getting messy. Human beings do that all the time. And Jesus absolutely, positively will not have it. Jesus will not have a situation where there are insiders and there are outsiders. And Jesus says, what are you doing? Don't stop them. No one who performs a miracle in my name will soon be able to speak poorly of me. Jesus is throwing this thing wide open. And Jesus says the most amazing, incredible thing after that. He says, anyone who is not actively against us is for us. Think about the world around us. Is there any other place in the world where you find a teaching like that? I don't think so, because things in our world at this point seem to be, if you're not actively for me, you're against me. And Jesus says that isn't how it is, actually. Anyone who's not trying to undermine you is for you. Jesus throws that wide open. It's this incredible new way of thinking about how to be in the world. If somebody isn't actively working against you, there's a good chance you might be on the same team. But we can't see that if we're closed in on ourselves. We can't see that if we're afraid of things being a little bit messy. We can't see that if we forget that our call as followers of Jesus is to be for people finding Jesus. If people don't know Jesus, there's a pretty good chance their life kind of has some stuff going on in it that we might say, ooh, that's kind of a lot going on there, right? But that's exactly what Jesus wants us to do. To go look for the places where the darkness seems to be winning the day and to step into those places and shine the light. That's what the church is called to do. I think if the church, as long as we remember that our job is to be for people, will continue to be unstoppable. But it requires intentionality. It's not our default setting. The next thing that the returned exiles did in the book of Ezra is they really sought to place blame as opposed to taking responsibility. And I got to tell you, this part of the book of Ezra is really, it's really ugly. It's really, really gross. So here's what was happening. These returned exiles were trying to make this very exclusive community that considered only of people who were exactly like them. And then they found out that some of the men within their community had married women who were not part of their very exclusive community. And so they decided that the way that they were going to deal with this situation is that they were going to identify who these women were, and they were going to send these women and their children and basically kick them out of the community. Now, no one in the entire book of Ezra said that the women were actually worshiping idols. No one in the entire book of Ezra actually said that the women were trying to get other people to worship idols. Their sin was that they existed. And it's because they were so afraid of anybody who could possibly cause a threat to their way of life. So the men who married these women, they were allowed to stay in the community, but the women and children had to go. It's evil. It's gross. And it is a really extreme example of what happens when we somehow manage to not be able to see the plank in our own eye and become obsessed with the speck in someone else's. When we have no ability to be able to look at ourselves and deal with our own stuff, but instead become consumed with someone else's stuff. This is what happened with the exiles who returned home. Last weekend, if you were here, maybe you heard Pastor Mike talk about the Reformation and what it is to receive grace. And if you didn't experience that or hear that, I'd encourage you to catch up on that. And I talked about it in the 5 o'clock service as well. But here's the thing. I just really believe that the challenge for us when we are so concerned about somebody else, the challenge for us, what's really going on underneath that, is that we haven't actually had grace become real for us yet. Because when grace actually becomes real for us, we realize that we don't deserve it either. And we become much less concerned about somebody else's issues and challenges because we realize that we have enough trouble dealing with our own. It's hard for us to confess where we've been wrong and where we fall short if we don't agree that grace is sufficient for us, if we don't recognize that grace is amazing for us. It's almost impossible to confess where we've been off track if we don't believe that grace is coming for us, that grace covers us. You'll know that grace is becoming more real to you when you stop worrying about what somebody else is up to out of some false sense of being the morality police, and when you start to realize that if somebody is doing something that's outside of God's boundaries, we want to talk to them about that because we love them and because it's hurting them, not because we're somehow offended personally by their sin. You'll know that grace is becoming real for you when you can read the parable of the lost son, where you can read about the older brother and his negative reaction to his younger brother coming home. And you can look at the older brother and you can even have sympathy for him, and you can say, I understand why he feels that way from a worldly perspective. But isn't it beautiful that the younger brother got in on it? Isn't it beautiful that the lost was found? You'll know that grace is becoming real for you when you hear the parable of the vineyard workers in Matthew chapter 20. And if you're not familiar with that, there's workers who are hired at 6 o'clock in the morning, noon, in the afternoon. There's workers who are hired all day long, workers who are hired an hour before quitting time. And then when it is quitting time and they line up to get their pay for the day, the workers who were there for an hour receive the exact same pay as the workers who started first thing in the morning. And the workers who started first thing in the morning kind of got a little bent out of shape about this. And they said, what are you talking about? Like, if they got that much, we should be getting way more than them. And when grace begins to come real to you, you'll be able to identify with the one who paid them saying, didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Like, you'll understand that, yeah, from a worldly perspective, again, I can understand why they were upset. But from a kingdom perspective, isn't it great that those folks at the end of the day got in on it? Isn't it great that God doesn't have favorites? Isn't it great that there are not insiders and outsiders? Because when grace is real for you, you recognize that if God did have favorites, and if God had insiders and outsiders, I wouldn't make the cut. None of us would, if that's what God was actually doing. When grace becomes real for us, we're able to own our mistakes, and we become much less concerned about other people's, certainly much less concerned about pointing them out, except for to say, hey, this is hurting you, and inviting them to something better, inviting them to grace and mercy and to the freedom that we have in Jesus. Grace requires that we recognize that God is really big, that his love for us is bigger than we could ever possibly imagine. And that leads us to the final thing that happened with the returning exiles, that happens with us sometimes because we're all human. And sometimes we just let God become too small. With the exiles, what happened to them is that they forgot that God had made these promises to Abraham and that God was going to keep his promises. It maybe wasn't going to look exactly the way they thought it was going to look, because we get confused and we get things misunderstood all of the time, but they forgot that God was going to do the thing, that this was God's project, that God had called them because God's project was love for the entire world, and God just wasn't going to forget about that. They allowed God and they allowed his love to become way too small for them. Paul writes in Ephesians, in our gospel reading that we heard, may you experience the love of Christ, though it is too great to understand fully. I love actually how the Message presents this to us. Eugene Peterson writes of this same verse, Ephesians 3, I ask him that with both feet planted firmly on love, you'll be able to take in with all the followers of Jesus the extravagant dimensions of Christ's love. Reach out and experience the breadth, test its lengths, plumb the depths, rise to the heights, live full lives, full in the fullness of God. That is a terrible sentence, but it helps you to understand, like, its fullness. Go ahead, look for the borders, test it out. Test out the measure of God's love for you. You will not be able to find where it ends. When God becomes too small for us, God's love becomes too small. And if we want to be able to be the church, if we want to carry who Jesus is in us and with us so that we can share that with the world around us, it starts by allowing the love of Jesus Christ to be as real to us as our own name. Not the things we're against, not the things that frustrate us, not the people that we're afraid of, not the people who are messy, but when his love becomes real to us, we are actually able to love the world around us. We are able to love because he so deeply and perfectly loved us first, not because we're great, but because Jesus is. We get this confused all the time. We do. We kind of want Jesus to kind of fit our agenda, or I think one of the things that the American church does in pockets, not everywhere, certainly not, but in some places, co-opts the message of Jesus to mean something that Jesus never intended for it to mean. The good news, though, is that that's not new. God's not wringing his hands over that, because people have been trying to co-opt the message of Jesus to fit their own agenda since Jesus was literally walking the earth. There's a clip I want to show you. It's from The Chosen, and it's one of the few clips that we'll see with Simon the Zealot, different Simon. And Simon the Zealot has an agenda, and Jesus fully well knows that he has an agenda. And as you see this, as you watch Jesus interact with Simon the Zealot and have this conversation with him and gently, ever so gently, or aggressively steer him in a different direction, as you're going to see, I don't want you to be thinking so much about Simon and his wrong agenda. I want you to be thinking about the ways that we get the message of Jesus twisted as well, because again, we get to confess that, knowing that Jesus doesn't think anything less of us because of grace. So as you watch this, be thinking about the ways that we get it confused, the ways that we want Jesus to fit into a particular box or a particular size or a particular thing that we care about. And then pay close attention to how Jesus responds. Take a look.
Your order trained you to be fearless, no?
No Lord but God, to the death.
What I did with your brother, it's not the last of the trouble I intend to cause.
You are Messiah, aren't you?
Yes.
I will do anything you ask.
I ask you to understand the nature of my mission, Simon.
Yes. How?
How indeed? It's not so easy with distracted humans,
I have trained for years for this. I am ready to execute your mission today.
We'll see. Show me your weapon. Impressive. It is something. Didn't see that coming.
You have no use for that?
I have a better sword. You'll see. We have much to discuss. Just be patient. You've had quite a week.
Without my secret dagger, why do you need someone like me?
I have everything I need. But I wanted you.
But why?
You're not alone in misunderstanding. But not to worry. I'm preparing something to share with the world. For now, wanting you by my side will have to be enough.
I love how Jesus just says to him, so kindly, so compassionately, for now, just hang out with me. For now, just get to know me. Set aside your agenda. And Jesus knows it's going to take him some time to do that. Set aside your agenda and just hang out with me. But Jesus promises him that he is preparing something. It's not that we're just going to sit around and hang out forever. And we always will have that opportunity to come back and just spend time with Jesus, because that's critically important as who we are, of followers of Jesus, to make that time. But Jesus says, just enjoy the fact for a minute that you didn't choose me, that I chose you. That I chose you. And let the reality that I love you so much fill you up, because Jesus says he is preparing something. He is getting something going. There is going to be a responsibility. There is going to be a job to do. Love each other. And Jesus knows that loving each other isn't going to just be sentiment. It isn't going to just be a feeling. It isn't going to just be thinking about it. Jesus knows that loving each other is going to have some verbs. It's going to have some action. It's going to have some things that go along with that. Jesus says, love one another. Throughout the entire story of the Bible, what you will find is take care of the poor, take care of the marginalized, take care of those who cannot necessarily help themselves. You find it again and again and again. It was one of the things that got the Israelites in trouble. It was one of the things that caused them to have to go into exiles, that they were not doing that. Church, there is a world right now that needs us in so many ways. That's why we do offerings for the Hurricane Melissa and what's been going on in Haiti and Jamaica. There are people in our community who don't know how they're going to feed their family this week, and it's not hypothetical. Legit don't know how they're going to feed their families. There are people who don't know how they're going to feed their families in West Des Moines and in Waukee. And so that's why you see all this extra food. We're going to use this for our food pantry, yes, which is going to be open to help people, and you saw the grand opening date for that, but there are people who have a need for food yesterday. And so if you haven't had an opportunity to bring in groceries to do that, church, this is our opportunity to demonstrate that we understand the assignment. It's our opportunity to demonstrate that we're on board with being the church, because the church isn't this place. The church isn't a building. It isn't an address. The church is you. I have hope for the North American church because of Jesus, and I have hope because of the North American church because it's you, because it's me, because it's people who understand the message of Jesus and who know that we have been chosen to reach out to the world around us and share the everlasting love of Jesus Christ, and that love has verbs in it. It moves. That's who the church is. The world is desperate to know that they are loved by people who they just haven't met yet. Heaven's going to be this incredible reunion where we get to meet the people who loved, understood the assignment, loved and served, and that mattered to us, and the people that we loved and served and it mattered to someone else. Isn't that going to be the most incredible, beautiful reunion that you could ever possibly imagine? Jesus is working to build his church through the love that he has for us, through the love that he has for the world, and he doesn't need us, but he invites us, and he calls us to be a part of it. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he threw the doors wide open to being part of his club, to being an insider. To being an insider and receiving grace and mercy is for every single one of us, and it started with this meal that Jesus gave to the disciples. On the night that he was betrayed, Jesus gathered with them in the upper room. He took the bread. He gave thanks for it. He broke it. He gave it to everyone there in that room, even though they were messy, even though they had their own agenda, even though they didn't get it, even though they had no idea what was coming for them. Jesus gave them the bread, and he said, "Take and eat. This bread is my body broken for you and for the forgiveness of people. Remember me whenever you eat it." In the same way, after supper, Jesus took the cup. He gave thanks for it. He gave it to all of them to drink. And he said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood shed for you and for all people. All people, for the forgiveness of their sins. Do this to remember me." We're going to pray the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray, and as the servers, I'll invite the servers to come forward as we do that. Let's pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. So as you come forward, we don't have ushers to guide you. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a piece of, you're going to come into the row here. As we get that figured out here, I'll help direct you. So when you come down this aisle right here, you can go to your left or your right. But you're going to come down this aisle and receive bread either on your left or your right. There is allergy-free on this side, which is going to be your left, if that's what you need. So come down this aisle and go, then exit this way. And then over here on this side, you'll come down this aisle and exit that way for good order, okay? You'll receive a piece of bread, and then you'll eat that, and then you'll receive either the dark-colored wine or the light-colored grape juice. You will pick which one you want, and then you can have that as well. I think I've given all the instructions appropriately. So you'll guide yourselves, and you'll be able to see on the screens as we go forward. We'll have the names scrolling of the members of our family, our church family, who have died in this past year, and we remember them. That's what we do on All Saints Day. We remember them, and we're thankful for Jesus, who we remember blew the doors wide open for you and for me in this meal. All is ready. Come and eat.